Reflections. Scotosis. Excerpts from Insight, A Study of Human Understanding by Bernard Lonergan. And this is the condemnation, that the light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. John 3, verse 19. People love darkness, as Jesus points out in John 3:19, because their deeds are evil. This is a familiar fact of life. Bernard Lonergan calls this condition scotosis, from the Greek word for darkness. Just as insight can be desired, so too it can be unwanted. Besides the love of light, there can be a love of darkness. If prepossessions and prejudices notoriously vitiate theoretical investigations, much more easily can elementary passions bias understanding in practical and personal matters. Nor has such a bias merely some single and isolated effect. To exclude an insight is also to exclude the further questions that would arise from it, and the complementary insights that would carry it towards a rounded and balanced viewpoint.
This is a trans couple, a trans man, trans woman couple. Like, tell me about what it's like to, as an experience as a trans couple. What is it experience you get?
He non-binary, trans mask.
Bisexual. I'm just trans.
I'm a gay male pup.
Yeah.
Gay male pup?
Yeah.
To lack that fuller view results in behavior that generates misunderstanding both in ourselves and in others. To suffer such incomprehension favors a withdrawal from the outer drama of human living into the inner drama of fantasy.
I wanted to make a video to thank my daddy for letting me be who I wanted to be.
This introversion, which overcomes the extroversion native to the biological pattern of experience, generates a differentiation of the persona that appears before others and the more intimate ego that in the daydream is at once the main actor and the sole spectator.
So I got served today at the pharmacy, and I'm not saying men can't look like this, because please go off, kings, but like, I'm not doing damage to masculinity. I think y'all are when you serve me, when you call me a man, right? Like, I'm not a man.
Humans are now hackable animals. To hack a human being means to understand that human better than he or she understand themselves.
Finally, the incomprehension, isolation, and duality rob the development of one's common sense of some part, greater or less.
It's a showtime!
White, transmasculine, femme, non-binary, temporarily mostly able-bodied, neurodivergent, obsessive-compulsive, chronically ill, culturally Jewish, Unitarian Universalist, non-monogamous, demi-low romantic, gray demi-bisexual, survivor of acute and complex trauma, millennial.
Of the corrections and the assurance that result from learning accurately the tested insights of others, and from submitting one's own insights to the criticism based on others' experience and development.
Transgender, he, him.
I'm cis, she, her.
Probably non-binary, yeah.
When I post about my gender identity and my sexuality, when I say that I don't want any labels, that is not an invitation for you to speculate on who I am or what I am. It's not a guessing game for you to play over whether I'm a girl or a boy, about what's in my pants, or if I'm pan or bi or trixic or homoflexible or gray romantic or anything else.
Come with me for my first Pride Parade with my two moms in New York City. Seeing all the rainbows, the joy, the excitement, hearing all the music, the freedom of expression, seeing other kids be themselves or support, it was absolutely an amazing experience.
Everybody should have the right to choose or choose not to use whatever labels feel appropriate to them.
The CDC releases the results of its Adolescent Behaviors and Experiences survey of just under 8,000 U.S. high school students. Both surveys revealing similar, never-before-seen findings in the two youngest generations sampled, Millennials and Generation Z. Stunning and unprecedented growth in the percentage of people saying they identify as gay, lesbian, or bisexual. questioning, or some other. With the CDC's survey now suggesting 1 in 5 U.S. high school students does not see themselves as heterosexual.
I'm a lesbian. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. I like frogs, not people. I'm sorry? I like frogs.
Let us name such an aberration of understanding a scotosis, and let us call the resultant blind spot a scotoma. Fundamentally, the scotosis is an unconscious process. It arises not in conscious acts, but in the censorship that governs the emergence of psychic contents. Nonetheless, the whole process is not hidden from us, for the merely spontaneous exclusion of unwanted insights is not equal to the total range of eventualities. Contrary insights do emerge, but they may be accepted as correct only to suffer the eclipse that the bias brings about by excluding the relevant further questions. Again, they may be rejected as incorrect, as mere bright ideas without a solid foundation in fact, and this rejection tends to be connected with rationalization of the scotosis and with an effort to accumulate evidence in its favor. Again, consideration of the contrary insight may not reach the level of reflective and critical consciousness. It may occur only to be brushed aside in an emotional reaction of distaste, pride, dread, horror, revulsion. Again, there are the inverse phenomena. Insights that expand the scotosis can appear to lack plausibility. They will be subjected to scrutiny, and as the subject shifts to and from his sounder viewpoint, they will oscillate widely between an appearance of nonsense and an appearance of truth.
Are we dominating women in women's sports? We are now dominating them in beauty pageants. What's up, proud man right here? Give me my flower!
I am offended that our children are not receiving affordable gender reassignment surgery along with hormone blockers and access to abortions. This alone is a threat to our democracy.
の部類はフィクトセクシャルっていうものに分類されるみたいですね。
幸せな喜びを共に分かち合い、悲しみや苦しみは共に乗り越え、お互いを尊敬し、永遠に愛することを誓います。
私にとっての初音ミクっていうのはただの好きなキャラクターっていうよりも私を救ってくれた人です。
まずは神道からご神父へとお納めいただきます。ご神父三深美さんからご神道明彦さんへとお願いいたします。
まあ結婚式挙げるまでキスしたことなかったんですよ。
敬愛の意を込めてウェディングキスをどうぞ。
Thus, in a variety of manners, the scotosis can remain fundamentally unconscious, yet suffer the attacks and crises that generate in the mind a mist of obscurity and bewilderment, of suspicion and reassurance, of doubt and rationalization, of insecurity and disquiet. Nor is it only the mind that is troubled. The scotosis is an aberration not only of the understanding, but also of the censorship. Just as wanting an insight penetrates below the surface to bring forth schematic images that give rise to the insight, so not wanting an insight has the opposite effect of repressing from consciousness a scheme that would suggest the insight. Now this aberration of the censorship is inverse to it. Primarily, the censorship is constructive. It selects and arranges materials that emerge in consciousness in a perspective that gives rise to an insight. This positive activity has by implication a negative aspect, for other materials are left behind, and other perspectives are not brought to light. Still, this negative aspect of positive activity does not introduce any arrangement or perspective into the unconscious demand functions of neural patterns and processes.
Liana, I use they demon pronouns.
This video is how to use our pronouns. For the demon pronouns, it would be Liana is my partner, Deem is cute, and I belong to Deem. I love Demon very much, and I hope Deem loves Demon's self too.
In contrast, the aberration of the censorship is primarily repressive. Its positive activity is to prevent the emergence into consciousness of perspectives that would give rise to unwanted insights. It introduces, so to speak, the exclusion of arrangements into the field of the unconscious. It dictates the manner in which neurodemand functions are not to be met, and the negative aspect of its positive activity is the admission to consciousness of any materials in any other arrangement or perspective. Finally, both the censorship and its aberration differ from conscious advertence to a possible mode of behavior and conscious refusal to behave in that fashion. For the censorship and its aberration are operative prior to conscious advertence, and they regard directly not how we are to behave, but what we are to understand. A refusal to behave in a given manner is not a refusal to understand. So far from preventing conscious advertence, the refusal intensifies it and makes its recurrence more likely. And finally, while it is true that conscious refusal is connected with the cessation of the conscious advertence, still this connection rests not on an obnubilation of intelligence, but on a shift of effort, interest, preoccupation. Accordingly, we are led to restrict the name repression to the exercise of the aberrant censorship that is engaged in preventing insight. The effect of the repression is an inhibition imposed upon neural demand functions. However, if we distinguish between demands for images and demands for effects, it becomes clear that the inhibition will not block both in the same fashion. For insights arise not from the experience of effects, but rather from imaginative presentations. Hence, to prevent insights, repression will have to inhibit demands for images. On the other hand, it need inhibit demands for effects only if they are coupled with the undesired images. Accordingly, the repression will not inhibit a demand for effects if that demand becomes detached from its apprehensive component, slips along some association path, and attaches itself to some other apprehensive component. Inversely, when there emerges into consciousness an effect coupled with an incongruous object, then one can investigate association paths, argue from the incongruous to the initial object of the effect, and conclude that this combination of initial object and effect had been inhibited by a repression.
Who am I introducing next? Who's next?
Nor is this conclusion to be rejected as preposterous because the discovered combination of image and effect is utterly alien to conscious behavior. For the combination was inhibited precisely because it was alien. Insights are unwanted, not because they confirm our current viewpoints and behavior, but because they lead to their correction and revision. Inasmuch as the Scotosis grounds the conscious affective attitudes of the persona performing before others, it also involves the repression of opposite combinations of neural demand functions, and these demands will emerge into consciousness with the effect detached from its initial object and attached to some associated and more or less incongruous object. Again, inasmuch as the Scotosis grounds the conscious affective attitudes of the ego performing in his own private theater, it also involves the repression of opposite combinations of neurodemand functions. And in like manner, these demands make their way into consciousness with the effect detached from its initial object and attached to some other more or less incongruous object. In a systemization of Jung's terminology, the conscious ego is matched with an inverse non-conscious shadow, and the conscious persona is matched with an inverse non-conscious anima. Thus, the persona of the dispassionate intellectual is coupled with the sentimental anima, and an ego with a message for mankind is linked to a different shadow. Our study of the dramatic bias has worked from a refusal to understand through the series of its consequences. There result in the mind a scotosis, a weakening of the development of common sense, a differentiation of the persona and the ego, an alternation of suspicion and reassurance, of doubt and rationalization. There follow an aberration of the censorship, the inhibition of unwanted imaginative schemes, the disassociation of affects from their initial objects, and their attachment to incongruous yet related materials. However, if the account has made no explicit mention of sex, this must not be taken to imply that the depth psychologists have been on the wrong track. On the contrary, the peculiarities of sexual development make it the ordinary source of materials for the scotosis. Because hunger and sex are vital, they constitute the areas in which experience can be contracted from its dramatic to its biological patterns. But hunger is present from birth, and its manifestations do not greatly change. Sexual development, on the contrary, is prolonged, and indeed both organic and psychological. From birth to puberty, there occur successive specializations of the neurodemand functions, and their term is not some free combination of movements, like playing the piano, but a naturally determined sequence of apprehensions, effects, and movements that admit only superficial modifications from the inventive dramatist. Interdependent with this change, there is a psychological transformation, in which the effective and submissive attitudes of the child within the family give place to the man self-reliantly orienting himself in the universe and determining to found a family of his own. During the course of this long and intricate process, there is room not only for waywardness, motivated by strange pleasure, but also for accidents, incomprehension, blunders, secretiveness.
Breastfeeding is a major part of the bond, building the bond between mother and child, and that bond will later affect a child's social and emotional and cognitive development. And I realized that when I got my breast taken away, there is so much more that was taken away than just some organs, like I thought they were. I felt like a monster.
I'd much rather have a good relationship with the daughter that I have than a poor relationship with a son that doesn't really exist.
Were you always the brother?
Not always.
What were you before?
They're a sister.
How come it changed?
Because I wanted to be a boy.
I prefer not to think of it as gender reassignment. It's getting them their correct gender, the gender that they've felt all along in their own heart of hearts, and oftentimes that their family has felt is their appropriate gender. So it's gender confirmation.
The physical transformation is done in a series of surgeries. The face comes first. For a woman transitioning into a man, Dr. Singh may do an implant on the nasal bridge to make the nose stronger, may do fillers around the cheek and jaw to create a heaviness. He uses liposuction to remove breast tissue and to reduce hips and define the arms. That completes what's called top surgery. Genital surgery or bottom surgery is the final, irreversible step.
If adverse situations and mistakes occur at random, they can be offset by the excretory function of the dream, by the pressures and attractions of a healthy environment, by suitable and opportune instruction, by some form of inner acceptance of the drive to understanding and truth with its aesthetic and moral implications. If thy eye be single, thy whole body will be lightsome. On the other hand, one adverse situation can follow another. The error and waywardness of each previous occasion can make still more probable the mishandling of the next. A scotosis becomes established. As an aberration of the understanding, it stands in the way of the proper development of effective attitudes.
Actually, it's a man.
Nobody said.
And then everyone around started clapping, and the guy who said it actually got arrested. Actually,
these are my pronouns.
dating should
and then
everyone around started clapping, and the guy who said it.
As an aberration of the censorship, it loads the neurodemand functions with inhibitions.
That question right there, like that question is like when it's asked with a lot of curiosity, right? That's the beginning of a lot of people's like gender identity development journeys.
If my mom who gave birth to me is a woman, and my wife is a woman, though I haven't asked her, maybe I should. But if they're all women, and also the boy who sits down with you and says, I think I'm a girl, actually is one, then what is a woman?
Yeah. Great question. I'm not a woman, so I can't really answer that.
Effective demands are shifted to incongruous dream objects. The incongruous objects may chance to function as do normal stimuli for effects, and waywardness may solidify the connection. The shadow and the anima can become organized as demands for integrated attitudes of love or hatred. Eventually, a point is reached where the imminently determined direction of the misled stream of consciousness is no longer capable of providing psychic representation and conscious integration for the distorted neurodemand functions. Then, neural demands assert themselves in waking consciousness through the inadequacies, compulsions, pains, and anxieties of the psychoneurosis.
At what age can a child first begin to transition into another gender or identify themselves as a gender different from how they were born?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's research and data that show that babies and infants understand differences in gender.
People who are transgender face a greater risk of anxiety and depression, and according to a 2011 survey, a startling 41% had attempted suicide.
Dramatic living has forfeited its autonomy, and only through delusions can it pretend to its old mastery.